Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Entertaining series on who Nintendo is suing this week. And of course, if you missed the last video, you've probably seen it in the news. Nintendo has filed a patent infringement lawsuit against the developers of Palworld. We went over what we presumed the patent was, but we're going to go into more detail because more details have been revealed and talk about the fact that even though Palworld is now on PlayStation 5, it is not for release in the region of Japan and why that matters. If you're getting far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But on September 19th, I did a video talking about the fact that Nintendo had filed a lawsuit for patent infringement against Pocket Pair, the parent developer of Palworld. It was very interesting. This was a patent lawsuit and not anything to do with IP, because even though this game may have a tangential relationship visually to Pokemon, clearly Nintendo didn't feel like there was enough there to sue, and that's because that lawsuit probably would have been thrown out of court. It wouldn't have held up, and Nintendo took their time, spent almost 7 months trying to figure out how to stick it to the developers of Palworld, and now they think they have an in. But the big news is this game is not coming out in Japan as of the time of the making of this video. It's coming out in 64 different regions, but it's not available in Japan, and because the patent lawsuit is originating in Japan, it's possible that developers do not want more installs of this out there for Nintendo to potentially calculate more instances of infringement, therefore running up the total. Because what it really seems like Nintendo wants to do here is just absolutely financially decimate Pocket Pair, the developers of Palworld, to the point where maybe they might not even continue. And that is definitely a Nintendo MO. They sue people on very loose things, and then they try to absolutely compound the damages on top of them to the point where that financial pain is too much to bear and somebody throws in the towel. Or in this instance, maybe the Palworld parent company licenses these patents from Nintendo, and Nintendo gets to make all the money all day long without actually having to do anything. And I spent too many hours of my spare time going through different Nintendo patent filings and grants. When it says grant, it means the patent has been granted by Japan, and some of these are absolutely the vaguest things possible, so much so that even a trained patent lawyer would have trouble deciphering them. That's because in my spare time I did have someone I know who is a patent lawyer read one of them, and they basically came back and said it is gibberish. I have no idea what that is they're talking about. And granted, they're not a video game player, but they do have the law behind them as far as the education is concerned. And again, we talked about the fact that this seemed to be down to throwing that Pokeball and affecting something in the game space. So I pulled all of the figure drawings on that patent, and all it is a character launching something into the playfield and capturing a monster with it. That is one of the most vague patents I've ever heard of. You'll see here they're talking about the beaten field characters, number types of observed, whether or not an item is caught and locked onto the Pokeball and then brought back in within the catch range. And why I'm bringing this up, that's so vague. You could say that Sega Bass Fishing did it first. I threw an object, some of the lures are balls, into the play arena. I've cast it out there, and I'm now trying to catch a monster, or in this instance a fish. I'm just giving you an example of how some patents can absolutely seem to be able to make anything a patent infringement. Throwing something into the game and affecting what's going on into the game could absolutely be considered anything, but is it because it's the shape of a ball? Could they have thrown a cube and that would have been fine? That's how vague this lawsuit is, and that's why Nintendo seems to be really reaching here in my opinion. Because yes, you throw a ball into the playfield and it hits monsters, but honestly you can probably think of 10 games off the top of your head that do something extremely similar, and that's why it seems like Nintendo is just out to get Palworld and the developers because they don't like that it is succeeding. Because again, there's so many different patents assigned here to Nintendo that just do not read like they make any sense whatsoever. But of course, because Nintendo holds the patent, they can argue in any direction as to how you've infringed upon it, like information processing system, information processing apparatus, storage medium, and game processing method patent. What the hell does that even mean? Read the abstract, and even still, I'm not 100% sure what they're trying to indicate here, and I think that's what they're trying to do. Another one is an information processing and storage system, and that's just talking about input targeting coordinates. What could that possibly be? If you have a cursor on the screen and it shows you coordinates, is that a violation of the patent? Would that mean new Lycan games that show a cursor and keep track of the coordinates in the background? Would that be a patent infringement? You just don't know because they're so vague, intentionally so. Nintendo can trot them out and use them basically whatever they would like to if they don't like what you're doing with something here. And again, if it hurts your brain, it hurts mine too, because these things are so incredibly vague, you really can't figure out what they're supposed to do in the first place. Even Palworld doesn't know what patents they're infringing upon or what to do with it, because at this point in time, Nintendo is still keeping that a secret, which is one of the stranger things I've seen. They've announced a lawsuit, but nobody knows what they're suing over. At least on some of their patents on the game controller here, it makes logical sense. They're talking about a slide-in, slide-out controller and how it functions with the actual console. Obviously, the Joy-Cons on the Nintendo Switch were a technological innovation, and it does allow Nintendo to patent for some things like that. But that is something that you can actually wrap your mind around and understand why they would require a patent for that versus some of these other patents which use such vague language it could literally mean anything. Because the Joy-Cons were an invention, they functioned in a different manner than most things that came before them. Nintendo was granted the patent, and that's totally fine. That one seems well enough deserved. You really can't argue with them over that. Sony has patents on their controllers, Microsoft has patents on their controllers. This is a thing that happens all of the time. But the actual patents on Palworld may be infringing just don't make any sense. And if you read what people think is going to happen, you can basically get an answer all the way across the board, whatever answer you want. Some experts are saying that Nintendo's 100% going to win. They've got this on lock. Other experts are going to say it seems like a far overreach and they don't anticipate Nintendo's going to win. I'm in the don't expect them to win category, but you never know. And do beware, because this lawsuit was filed in Japan. It has nothing to do with the US or any other region. And basically within the United States, these very vague patents are usually not honored. Our patent system and the courts here do not look kindly upon a patent that can be used for basically striking down anything. That's why we have the term patent troll, and a lot of people lose their patents because they're found to be undefendable. But do remember, Japan is a different region, and it seems like Nintendo gets away with a lot more there, because even when they're found guilty in a patent infringement lawsuit, somehow they get the ruling overturned and the damages drop down. And I'll explain that a little bit later in the video. But again, this expert that seems to think Nintendo's going to win, something I don't really agree with, does seem to think that they're trying to financially hurt Pocket Pair as much as humanly possible, and that's something I definitely 100% agree with. Nintendo wants to hit them where it hurts, in the bank account, because as we talked about in the previous video, based upon sales figures, it seems like 30 million different copies of Palworld have been sold at this point in time. 30 million is a very big number, and Nintendo sees that and thinks to themselves, they owe us some money, they're eating our lunch, we want this money, they don't deserve it. Because again, 30 million copies at $30 is 900 million in gross revenue. Even when you talk about expenses and salaries, that's still a big chunk of change, and Nintendo seems to think that it belongs to them. Now, another expert says that they seem to think Nintendo is 100% reaching here, and that is what I agree with, because these patents are so incredibly confusing and don't really talk about anything whatsoever. It could really mean whatever Nintendo wants it to mean, and it definitely is written in that manner so that they can basically point to it and say, see, you've committed an infringement upon us. And that's just scary for the entire video game development industry, because they're going to always be thinking, what could Nintendo have written down that we don't understand but could come back to bite us in the ass in the future? Kind of feels like when a partner asks you a loaded question and you realize to yourself, it doesn't matter how I answer it, it's going to be wrong and I'm going to be in trouble when I actually open up my mouth. A very similar idea. Even stuff like Shadows of Mordor here, the mechanic on how different encounters are remembered, or even the mini games in some of the Namco games, Ridge Racer being included, do have patents, and those are at least a little bit more self-explanatory. Playing a mini game in a loading screen, that's something you can point to and say, well, that is an innovation, and honestly, if another developer can't use it until the patent expires, you're not really missing out on much. We don't need mini games on loading screens, we can just wait the 10 to 15 seconds, and honestly, loading is so short now, you really couldn't even get a mini game in. But stuff like throwing a ball into a playfield is just absolutely wild. And don't forget, Nintendo was sued and lost about patent infringement for the 3DS's glasses free screen. They lost in court, but somehow got the case overturned on appeal, then ended up having to pay out way less, almost like maybe there could be some favoritism in Japanese courts towards Nintendo, one of the biggest and most well-known Japanese gaming companies, or companies in general of all time, coming out of Japan. And this is just getting ridiculous. You have a lawsuit that people that are being sued don't even know what they're being sued over in the specific patent instance, and absolutely nobody has any idea what's going on. And it all seems to be coming down to you throwing a ball into a playfield and affecting something that's happening. In that instance, if an NBA Jam remake came out, could Nintendo argue, hey, you threw a ball into the playfield and affected something? that would be a problem in our eyes. And I am kind of being a little bit jokey about this, but the main takeaway is the fact that Nintendo was able to get Palworld not released in Japan for PlayStation 5, and I'm sure that's because the more instances of installs, the more they're going to say there's instances of patent infringement, and the higher they can run the damages up. It's just embarrassing, but we'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.